Okay, so this presentation is what I do for my 7th graders. I was given the outline of the language of lend and borrow and drop off and pick up. Now this is the language, it's pretty minimal, I mean, in terms of what they're asking you for to sort of focus on for 2 weeks. But it is problematic in the Chinese language because a lot of times the Chinese language doesn't really have the vocabulary to talk about certain concepts that like English does. The big example, prime example would be like genders. It's not very specific. Like their subject pronoun for the genders, ta, is both female and male. So you can only really derive it from a context, which means all them cheating women out there can kind of disguise their cheating. But anyway, there's a lot of that in the Chinese language. So this topic, comes up as a problem. So I was given this topic, and the advantage of having worked in the field for a while is that I'm familiar with it and I have material accumulated. And so I decided to go back to a presentation I did for Wall Street English called The Have and Have-Nots, where I was kind of, was talking about wealth and that concept of having and having not. But I felt like that was the best place to kind of start this lesson. And this is one of those lessons for me that really kind of comes together with it really nicely, and I would say there's definitely a brilliance to it. There's no way around it. The way it I'm using a reward system that ties right into it, so the students are talking about, they're using the language in a context where it's necessary to use it in a lot of ways. So what I came up with is just kind of a very simple idea of a reward system. Is just get out of debt, and you give your teams 1, team 2, and team 3. You give them all 100 points, or you give them 50 points, right? And the whole idea is you answer a question, you get to roll the dice. And rolling the dice, for that I have this mechanism here. Took a little spice jar, put a dice in it, answer the question right, I hand you the dice, you roll the dice. And what your idea is here, is every time you roll the dice, you're subtracting from your debt. The first one to 0 is the winner. Now to kind of add into this idea of wealth, the first one to 0 is the winner. But to add into this idea of wealth is the first one to 0 gets everybody else's points. So if they have 9 left, or they have 50, and they have 9, they get to accumulate the debt of all the others, which is pretty much how the economy works. And that constitutes wealth. At the end, really the objective of the game is to have the most points at the end of the game. But the only way you get all those points is by getting to 0 first, which is really kind of how the economy works these days. So anyway, I decided to look at have and have not. And I chose have got because you have that phrasal verb. And since I'm going to be looking at drop off and pick up, I felt it's time that one of the main focuses of this lesson will be phrasal verbs. And of course I put the Chinese up here, yo and mayo. And so we go through this. This is all, like I said, these slides here are all from a presentation I had done previous. And all I do is reformat it here. I change the font, I change the backgrounds, and actually do some, maybe change some of the vocabulary here, like changing a positive means yes. But, that saves me a lot of time because, it's a lot easier to be just reformatting. It's a lot easier, a lot quicker just be reformatting something than actually be like creating it from scratch. So we go through how to format questions with have and have got, and it's important. I think this is also an important thing is to make that distinction of when you're really using the auxiliary verb with have and you're just kind of using your main verb in a phrasal verb, not the participle. And then I turn into the first kind of activity exercise. I want the 2 sentences, a positive and a negative, using have. I give them some prompts, and they have to come up with the 2 sentences. Sometimes I try to get them to write it, but that can go very slow. You can have them come up to the board and write it. And then I do it with the have got. So they're immediately starting to use those verbs. And this should actually be reviewed for a 7th grader using have and have got. But it's a good point to review it. And once we get through that, I have a little quick game here. I have this slide also from the have and have not, introducing the idea of ways of answering questions. Yes. Answering yes or answering no.
No.
I put that in there because I like to use the different accents in terms of listening. Also, it's to introduce this next exercise, which is, you get to, this activity is the idea is you ask, do you have a computer? And you can answer, yes, I do, no, I don't. All right, so it's yes, I do have a computer. And this is where it kind of turns into the game, into the activity here, because you have, I let them ask the question. And so somebody will say, do you have a basketball? The other one will say, do you have a pen? So I write down what team said basketball or which one said pen, and then we reveal it. All right, so do you have a basketball? Or does he have a basketball? Yes, he does. Does he have a pen? No, he doesn't. The person who gets a yes gets 5 points. Whoever says yes gets 5 points. Right? So we go over here and we say, oh, you got a yes, -5. And they work towards their data. So that's the have and have not part of it. And then they go late, and we go through all these slides. Good exercise, good game. Then we get into lend and borrow. The first part of it, we go into lend and borrow. And of course, I make the distinction of what is lend is kind of correlated with have, and borrow is correlated with have not. And I also make the point, it's also important to make the point of to, what prepositions you would use. Lend is lend to, and borrow from. Give them a definition, give the Chinese, give a few examples. And then I go on to this exercise where you have a sentence here, and I ask them to put the words into, create the sentence for me. And it's a question coming in on my hand. So these slides, working on their dad. And this is always good because you're just changing text here. I usually do 10 slides. And in a lot of cases, it's good to have leftover material. It's good to have material you don't use. All right. And then we go on to borrow, and this is the flip side of it. And it's pretty much the same thing, what does borrow have not? Give a few examples. Once again, as with lend, it's important to sort of touch on lent as the past simple tense, the past tense of lent. And if you want to, and I do touch on it really briefly, I just say it's also the name of a Christian holiday having to do with kind of giving up something, so it kind of makes sense. And here, I try and touch on the past tense here. 7th graders should be familiar with it, and also question forms. I do this slide. It's not really, I actually have been skipping over this slide recently because some of it's a little bit vague. I try and make distinctions between there's certain things that can't be borrowed because you can't give them back. Most specifically food, you can't borrow somebody's drink. Here, this exercise is just choose the correct word. Since it's a common verb, it's a regular verb. You're really just kind of playing with verb, subject, agreement. I do some with the gerund form, questions with that, try and touch on different aspects of the grammar. Until we get to this. And once again, I introduce the question, can I borrow? I give them some ideas for short answers. This is material I haven't used yet in class. Have them answer it in one way or the other. I get to this slide, should be familiar in my other presentations here. We're looking for a yes again. Can I borrow your blah, blah, blah? Yes, yes, yes. Or no. Actually, the no is the penalties here. Okay. And then there's a review time. So after lend and borrow, that's when I'm looking to break the class into another class. So this would be the second class. Immediately go into review. I do a sticky ball thing where, in the beginning of the class, I want to review borrow and lend, sticky ball, which one is it? Borrow and lend. Let's get out of this because there's so many of these. Here we go. And we move on to phrasal verbs at this point in the next class. Where are we? In the next class, I started off with phrasal verbs, right? Because we're going to be talking about drop-off and pickup. We give them the Chinese definitions. I don't know exactly if this explains it as well as it could in Chinese. Usually the students don't have a problem with it. And I make the distinction, the important part of it is you got a verb and you got a particle. Verb and a particle. But really the important thing I want them to take away from talking about phrasal verbs is this thing you can do with the noun. How you can take the noun and you can put it between the verb and the particle. And that's really kind of takeaway I'm hoping they're left with when I talk about drop-off and pick-up. So we go through drop-off, definitions, much like lend and borrow. Then I break it down. Here we go through 2 sentences, but this time I want you to use the 2 forms of drop-off, right? I want to drop off my son at school with the noun after the verb, and I drop my son off at school with the noun in between the verb and the particle. So it's a familiar exercise, but it focuses on a key grammar point, I think, that they should be taking away from this lesson. Then we go through a bunch of those. Once again, you got the debt gang. Then I have this slide here, working with drop off. It starts. Oh, it's not working. Go back. Go back. Go forward. There is it. Where'd it go? Technical difficulties. Always frustrating. Always frustrating. It's freezing up now. There it is. Anyway, I mean, if they're hitting me below the belt, it's because the stuff is so much further ahead of what other teachers are doing in the classrooms, I mean, 85, like 90% of the teachers do not produce this kind of work for their classrooms. Do not put this kind of consideration in the classrooms. They put it more into the social aspects. So when they're hitting you below the belt, when they're trying to take swipes at you, and when they've been doing this ever since I went to college, ever since I got around these sort of people who feel like that's their one main chance is to hit people below the belt, it's been like this. I have always been producing this kind of work there. I have always been having this kind of serious sort of intention when I take a job. Anyway, this is another activity where you have start. I give them some words, some prompts. They have to come up with the word, the sentence. Spin the dial. This goes towards their debt. All right, and we just got a bunch of slides there to do that. After that, I just, it's just kind of, you go through similar with pickup. Once again, a phrasal verb, we go through the same sort of introduction, the same sort of explanations. But pickup, and here I'm trying to explain that when you pick up something, it's kind of expected. You know, it's something that people expect. Doing the sentences. Doing sentences. What are the activities here? I can't remember necessarily. Oh. Here I chose to do, since, you know, it's just kind of I changed this one to beware the bombs. And here, if you get the bomb, you lose 5 points. I will pick up, and here they're just kind of using their vocabulary and pick up. So I might say, I'll pick up my jacket, I'll pick up my coffee. If you picked up, and there's a bomb there's a bomb on it. Otherwise, you get points. You know, otherwise you get points. Let's try one. I want to see how that goes. I actually didn't get to use this one. Maybe I can use it this week as a review. Please help me. I can't pick this. And someone team might say elephant up. I can't pick this car up. See what we get. The bomber there. So that's -5, and the other are reward points. That's pretty much it for this presentation. I usually try and use that sticky ball target practice thing as a review mechanism at the beginning of a class, to go over material we did. Immediately starts to give them their team some points, or it gets the reward system up and running. So I use that. But this was my presentation on borrow and lend. It's one of the classes that, you know, every once in a while you get this idea that just all comes together so perfectly. And with that debt reward system, I really feel like it's really one of my better lessons this year so far. So I have more to come, so stay tuned, and I'll be knocking these things out as I go. Take it easy.